Happy Halloween. I regret that I will not be able to make my presentation in Spanish. My wife speaks Spanish. My two sons speak Spanish. Alas, I do not speak Spanish. I'd like to thank the organizers, the director of the library, for inviting me here. It is, of course, always good form to say thanks. But in this case, I want to testify that the thanks are very, very genuine. Some of you have already seen me waving around this little card, identification card from UNAM, a quarter of a century ago, when I was a visiting professor here several times. And I remember that part of my professional career very fondly. And I'm just delighted to be back at UNAM again. So when I say thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to see some old friends like Federico and Julio, and particularly Margarita and Julie, indeed I am very pleased to have been invited back. What I will be talking about is talking briefly about what we know about library and information services and the shift from libraries to knowledge management, and then spend some time talking about what is knowledge management, and then what are the lessons that can be learned, from the transition from librarianship to knowledge management, particularly for academic libraries. My presentation, in some ways, will be somewhat parallel to what Professor Dean Matarazzo presented 2 days ago, in that it will be looking at, in some ways, at corporate libraries, special libraries, and the changes that have happened there, and then extrapolating to academic libraries. However, my conclusions will be, I think, substantially more positive than were Jim's conclusions. We have a reasonably good background knowledge about the subject of libraries and their effect on organizational productivity. And you got a small handout with the references for some of these papers. However, much of what we know about libraries and their effect on organizational productivity is very deep. And part of the reason it is dated is this shift from librarianship to knowledge management. For several reasons. Jim was correct in his discussion of corporate libraries and how much downsizing there has been in corporate libraries. Just as an example, in the 70s, I was a corporate library director at Pfizer. Pfizer was a much different company than it is now. It was a very research-oriented company. And in the 70s, the Pfizer library budget was bigger than the library budget at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is a number that I find academic librarians always find very surprising. Most academic librarians have a notion of corporate special libraries as being rather small institutions. Frequently, as measured by budget, they're not small. The Pfizer library system did not have as many staff as MIT, but it had a substantially larger budget. That's probably no longer true. Part of it is the transition from libraries to knowledge management. part of it is the transition in many organizations, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, to change their strategy. In the 70s, Pfizer's strategy was to do a great deal of research and develop its own products. At Pfizer, and increasingly in the pharmaceutical industry, the strategy now is to let smaller companies develop new products. For Pfizer and other major pharmaceutical companies to then license those products or purchase and acquire the company along with the products, but to do less research in-house. So its library budget has declined. If you try to measure, one of the reasons that it's hard now to make calculations of the sort that I talked about comparing Pfizer's library budget to MIT's library budget is that knowledge management is a much broader, much more inclusive concept than librarianship is. In librarianship, the management of information was already a very difficult, nebulous quantity to try to quantify. And knowledge management is even more diffuse and more nebulous than librarianship. It includes essentially everything in librarianship, but it includes a great deal more. For example, part of what is included in the notion of knowledge management is how do you change the corporate culture of the organization to encourage the transfer and the utilization of information and knowledge. Changing the corporate culture of the organization means changing the compensation system of the organization. What is your salary? What will be your bonus at the end of the year? No one ever thought of librarianship as being part of the decision-making process for what people's salaries would be. Salaries of everyone in the organization, not just salaries of people in the library. But that's what the notion of knowledge management includes. So, for example, much of what's done in human relations, the management of the organization's compensation structure, is human relations, is knowledge management. But how do you say how much of the HR budget is KM and how much is something else? It would now be very, very difficult to do a comparison and say, what is Pfizer's KM budget compared to MIT's KM budget? The notion is so broad and so difficult to define. Another reason relates to the change in Pfizer's strategy of acquiring new products by acquiring smaller companies or licensing material in. It's very hard to make comparisons of a Pfizer versus an MIT when corporate organizations don't look this year the way they looked last year. If you look at Pfizer this year, there are probably 3 acquisitions and 1 unit that gets disposed of. And it's quite a different company than it was last year. And a different, whereas it used to be, I could do studies of the pharmaceutical industry, and Pfizer was Pfizer, and Upjohn was Upjohn, and Lilly was Lilly, and Merck was Merck. And they looked at, in terms of the organizational size and what units they composed, they look this year exactly the same way they looked 10 years ago. That's no longer true. The corporate world is very, very volatile. So the data that we have on library KM effectiveness tends to be dated. It dates from a period when you could measure things much more easily than you can now. A colleague and I are working on updating an article on librarianship and KM and the effect on productivity of organizations. But we're finding that there's very little literature out there that has any real quantitative data in it, precisely because it has become so hard to measure that phenomenon. But The good news is that I think the phenomena that we've just been talking about are in the long run rather good news for academic libraries. And this is sort of where my thrust takes a slightly different direction from the thrust of Professor Matarazzo's presentation. Organizations have changed their research style. Large organizations are increasingly emphasizing, de-emphasizing in-house research and preferring to buy their new products or acquire their products from smaller companies that have developed those products or developed those patents externally. But that's, I think, perhaps the key takeaway from this presentation is where did those small companies that Pfizer is acquiring come from? They're mostly, in some sense, spin-offs from universities, from UNAM, from Stanford, from Yale. Where did those companies, the people who developed those companies, what did they use as information resources? They take out the university library. So the importance of university libraries is not decreasing. If anything, it's increasing. It's particularly notable in the pharmaceutical industry, and I mention that because that's part of where it comes from. But I think if you look at the Oracles, the Intels, the Microsofts, the Googles, yes, they are doing a substantial amount of in-house research, but they are also very much following that same pattern of trying to acquire exciting new startups and purchase other companies. You can't look at the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times for more than a few days without seeing articles about what company Microsoft is trying to acquire, or what company Google has just purchased. The whole corporate world is evolving in that fashion. And the real consequence is to make university libraries more important. Okay. We'll spend some time now talking about what is knowledge management. Where did this phrase knowledge management come from? It came from the consulting industry. The PricewaterhouseCoopers, the McKinseys, the Anderson Consulting, the Ernst & Young. When the internet came along, they realized that the in-house version of the internet, the intranet, was a wonderful boon to them. There were companies that were geographically distributed. They had problems communicating. How did the folks in the Singapore office know what the folks in the Mexico City office were doing? And if the folks in the Mexico City office had just done a study on transportation and how to decrease pollution and get more cars off the road and greater use of public transportation, what if they wanted a similar study? How did you make sure that the folks in the Singapore office who were doing the Bangkok study knew what the folks in Mexico City had done? You didn't reinvent the wheel. Because if the folks in Singapore knew what the folks in Mexico City knew, they could bid at a lower cost in the competition, and they could do the job much more efficiently and make more money. So the intranet was a wonderful way to exchange information around a geographically distributed, information-intensive company. The principal product of the consulting firms is information and knowledge. There had been, just before the arrival of the internet, and a great enthusiasm in the corporate world for intellectual capital, which is basically what do you know? And the reason particularly in the U.S. was the concern that American companies where there's a disadvantage with Japanese and German companies in particular, because American companies tend to be funded by the stock market, and which look at things in a very short-term perspective, whereas German and Japanese companies tend to get their financial support from banks with whom they have a long-term relationship. And therefore, German and Japanese companies could invest more and take a longer-term view than American companies. And that put American companies at a competitive disadvantage. There was some truth to that. Part of the response to that was to say, well, if you try to measure the performance of companies in a way that included not just immediate sales, but included things like intellectual capital. What is the worth of a company? What does it have in the way of the knowledge that it's created? Therefore, there came this enthusiasm. Balanced scorecard was a phrase that was used to try to get companies to measure the value of their knowledge. The problem is there was an enthusiasm that peaked and then waned. The problem is it's very difficult to measure intellectual capital. You can count how many Pfizer patents there were this year compared to how many Merck patents, and most of those patents will have no significance. A few will be very important. And if Merck got a few more than Pfizer, but Pfizer had half a dozen really important patents and Merck had only 2, the total count for patents doesn't mean very much. But the enthusiasm for intellectual capital paved the way for knowledge management. And then when you looked at people, the consulting companies jumped on the internet, and they were already primed by the enthusiasm for intellectual capital. They were themselves information-intensive companies. And so they started using the internet intensively to facilitate their own operations and to invent ways to develop expertise locations and find who the companies have what knowledge. You can come up with best practices, databases, etc. And then they realized that in developing this expertise for their own use, they had a new product that they could sell to other companies. But that should be important to Ford or Mercedes. But if you want to sell a product, you have to have a name for it. And the name that they came up with was knowledge management. It appears to have been used first at McKinsey, one of the consulting firms in the very early 1990s. Quite a few people object to the phrase knowledge management. They say you can't manage knowledge. Knowledge sharing would be a much more appropriate term. It reminds me of some of us are old enough to remember when word processing was new, and people were very upset with the phrase word processing. We don't process words, we have poetry, literature, you process meat, and you make spam out of it, that's what processing is. But word processing is the phrase that I use. It's the phrase that now, if you ask the undergraduates anywhere here, they know the phrase word processing. Does it ever occur to them that no, that it's not a very good description? No, that's just the phrase. They know what it means. That's the way it is with knowledge management. It may not have been the best term for what we now call knowledge management. What we're stuck with. So what are some of the what is knowledge? These are a couple of the classic definitions of knowledge management. One by Ruggles in 1998. The newly emerging interdisciplinary business model dealing with all aspects of knowledge within the context of the firm, including knowledge creation, codification, sharing, learning, and innovation. Well, if you look at those words, codification, sharing, part of it. The Gartner Group, you already have in your handout, so I won't read it. what you will notice is that the definitions are very business, corporate oriented. And I put that on the right here. Within the context of the firm and enterprises information assets. Knowledge management was not originally thought of much in terms of universities and university libraries. It was thought of in terms of corporate situation. Now, what is knowledge management about? It's about intellectual property. It's the knowledge that you have. This is where the enjoyment of Mr. Gattaca, who we'll see in a moment, why I say it's for his enjoyment. Mark Twain, I'm sure all clear of, famous novelist and humorist, but also a remarkably keen observer of the world around him, and of society. What was it? 1889. It's a very amusing book. This has been described as the first significant time travel literature. The thrust of it is that a gentleman who is a very well educated industrial plant in Connecticut has an accident. His head is hit, and he wakes up to discover that he is in medieval England. And I won't go into the details, but he ends up being the boss, the person the king relies upon to make all of the decisions. He replaces Merlin, King Arthur's magician, and he becomes the boss. And so he immediately sets about trying to move medieval England into modern times, the late 19th century. I teach a course in information policy. This is the way I start the course. I give the students this question. When Henry Morgan becomes the boss, he sets about to bring medieval England into the late 19th century, holding forward by about 1,000 years. The second thing he does to modernize England is he sets up a school system. What is the first thing does anybody want to guess? No? That's a good guess. He sets up a patent system. Patent system, intellectual property. Encourage the creation of knowledge and intellectual property. Mark Twain was a very keen observer. There's also a reason why the title for the book, which people at the time probably would have recognized more, why he says Connecticut Yankee. Properly, of course, it doesn't need the word Connecticut. If you're being correct with the term, Yankee only means Connecticut. And if you're being sloppy with the term, you can include Vermont, which is New Connecticut. But it's a term devised by the Dutch in New Amsterdam, New York, to distinguish the Connecticut English from the Massachusetts English. So people in New York or Massachusetts don't deserve to be called Yankees, and people in Virginia or Texas or California are totally unentitled to the term Yankee. You may guess that my bias is that I grew up in Connecticut. But there's a reason that Mark Twain made his hero a Connecticut Yankee, which is in Mark Twain's time, Connecticut was the patent capital of the world. There were more patents per capita in Connecticut in Mark Twain's time than there were in any other region in the world. It was the world's champion at producing patents. There's a wonderful book that I wish I had put in the notes that I distributed by William Rosen, R-O-S-E-N, called The Most Powerful Idea in the World, a story of steam, industry, in innovation. The word innovation you've heard frequently in this context. The title is a little bit misleading because most of the book is in fact about the invention of steam power and the invention of the railroad. But the really important, I think, at least the reason I assigned the book in my information policy class, is that he makes the point as to why was it that steam power and the railroads and the Industrial Revolution began in England and not in France, where the scientific knowledge was more advanced than it was in England. And his thesis is that it was because England had almost accidentally developed a patent system. And innovators in France were not rewarded in the same way that they were in England. And there wasn't the same motivation to innovate. The French government did give some awards sometimes for advances that they thought were important, but you never knew whether you might get one. And if you did, it would be 50 years too late. And it just didn't provide the same motivation that being able to get a patent on something did. And that's why, of course, I say, just did the talk this for Mr. Goddard. He stressed in his talk the importance of patents. So KM is about intellectual property. There's another way to think about what KM is about. And that is, think about researchers. And of course, we're going back to the world of academics and libraries. Researchers in quintessential knowledge workers. And increasingly, all of us, increasingly the business world, is composed to a large extent of knowledge workers. And the definition that I didn't invent, but I don't know that anyone else uses, but that I like, is that knowledge management is the movement to create in the business environment at large the same environment that's normally conducive to successful research. If an environment is good for researchers, it should be good for other knowledge workers. And what a substantial amount of research, which I've done a little bit, indicates that what correlates with successful research is deep open communication. This is just one little nugget that I pulled out of some research that I did. I looked at the pharmaceutical industry and came up with the metric of what were the most productive companies, how many patents or how many new drugs did Pfizer have compared to Merck. But it was a bit more sophisticated because it looked at whether the Food and Drug Administration had thought the new drug was important or merely a useful addition, whether the company had a patent position on the drug or whether it had licensed the drug in from outside, etc. And I asked a lot of questions, and the single most significant correlation was to the question that I asked researchers in that company how they perceived their own organization's emphasis on preserving confidentiality about new drug development. And the correlation was very strong and was also negative. The more the researchers thought that their company was very concerned with preserving confidentiality of information, the poorer the research success of the company. The companies that were most successful were the companies that cared least about whether they preserved confidentiality. They were the companies that were most conducive to rich, open communications. And they wanted their people to go out and talk with people at other companies. They wanted their people to keep in touch with their old faculty members at the university, because they thought it was much more important to get new stuff into the pipeline than it was to preserve the confidentiality of what they had already done. And I think that's there's a whole literature on this, supporting this idea that what's successful in the research environment is rich, deep, open communications. But this, I think, is the single most salient piece. Okay, another way to think about knowledge management is that knowledge management, well, in English there is a phrase, and I'm told that there's not an exact equivalent in Spanish, but there's a phrase in English that if I say of my wife that she doesn't see the forest for the trees, I'm allowed to use my wife for examples like that. What it means is that she's focusing on the specifics, but she doesn't get the bigger picture. And that's what the forest for the trees metaphor means. What I mean by that is, and you won't be able to probably read all of those things. This comes from a book that I did for IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations, some years ago. And what was interesting is that, particularly in the late 20th century, extending into this century, there have been a great many enthusiasms in the business literature for things that related to the management of information or to the use of information. And what I am saying is that the forest is all of these things over here on the right. These are enthusiasms, and they're in the handout that you've got. You probably won't have time to go through them one by one, but there is also in the handout a bibliographic reference to a book that describes some of the very recent ones, like big data and cloud computing. What's interesting is that there are so many of these enthusiasms that relate to information that appear in the business literature. Data-driven systems design, information technology is competitive advantage, managing the archipelago of information services, total quality management and benchmarking, competitive intelligence, business process re-engineering, data warehousing, core competencies, information-driven marketing, customer relationship management. They all have to do with managing information. If we started talking about each one individually, we'd be here at least all day, and all of the other people who have good things to say would be very good. So let's skip over it. But the point is that if you look at those and try to look at them from a library perspective, there are sort of four major themes that you can extract from those treaties. One is that information management is important and that it demands top management attention. And that as information systems mature, the emphasis shifts from the technology to the information. And external information is important, not just the organization's information. And it's releasing the shackles of print on paper technology. It helps you digitize information. You can do many things in a much more efficient fashion than you could if you were limited to print on paper technology. And that's what this is trying to say, is that what all of these little lines indicate is these different themes support this thesis. The lines that connect this theme. If there's a blue line from information systems that mature and it goes down to information resource management, then this is one of the themes that comes out of the information resource management tree. And what I'm arguing is that, in a way, what knowledge management is the forest of all of those trees. It's the recognition in the business world that information and knowledge and the management of it is terribly important. Okay, how did knowledge management developed. These are all of those names of the trees. As knowledge management came along, and you wanted to develop its knowledge management and literature about it, there's some fairly clearly observable states. And the first is a state that I call private internet out of intellectual capital. There was fascination with the internet. My wife and I used to ride horseback and buy the internet out of intellectual capital. That's a phrase that horse people use to talk about of a horse, what animal is the father and what animal is the mother, by so-and-so, out of so-and-so. The term horse people use. It just means that knowledge management is the son of the internet, the marriage of the internet, and the notion of intellectual capital. And the key phrases in that period were the development of best practices and lessons learned databases. Then the second stage was what I call the HR stage, the recognition that it's important to get people involved. That if you build it, they will come is not a very good formula for success, despite the success of building. You've got to make it easy to use. You have to build communities of practice. You have to change the organizational culture. And that was the second stage of the development of knowledge management. The third stage is what I call the library stage. There was a recognition that if you can't find what you want, it isn't very good if it doesn't help. If the system is easy to use, but you still can't find what you want. If you don't have good metadata, it's not going to be a very good knowledge management system. I remember being at a Koenig meeting with the president of SLA, and we were sitting next to each other, and it was in a workshop, and people were paying many thousands of dollars to go to this workshop, and we're sort of looking at each other and saying, so all these people who are paying all of this money for this workshop understand that what they're getting is Library Science 101, and if the name of the workshop was Library Science 101, instead of taxonomies in knowledge management, would they have paid the same price? Probably they wouldn't have paid the same price. And then we can argue that there's a fourth stage, which is where we are now, with increasing recognition of the importance of contact. A nice example is Caterpillar has a very large knowledge management system. And they debated for a great many months as to how open they should make it. And they finally concluded that it should be very open. The downside, of course, is if Komatsu in Japan discovers that Caterpillar is having a problem with a new product that just released, Komatsu would like to know that. But they concluded that the advantages of being open were more important. That some dealer in Argentina who handled Caterpillar products might come up with a solution for it. And say, yeah, it is a problem in very dusty environments or whatever, but here's what we discovered that can solve the problem, or at least ameliorate it temporarily until the Caterpillar comes up with a permanent fix. And that being open with their communications was much more important than keeping the knowledge away from Komatsu. And I think they still maintain that policy has been very successful. And a friend of mine who wrote one of the chapters for the book that Julio was kind of he uses the phrase that the lawyers insisted that there had to be non-disclosure agreements that the dealer in Argentina signed. And he described it as the mother of all non-disclosure. And he said what they discovered. Listen, people didn't pay no attention to it. Didn't matter. The dealer from Argentina just said fine, signed it, and was happy to get access to all of the caterpillar data. Didn't worry about what the non-disclosure agreement had with it. So we got in trouble with his lawyer for reading the agreement. The United Nations is another good example. But again, I don't have too much time to go into that. What are some of the components of the KM system? Portals, access to external information, communities of practice, best practices databases, lessons learned. Best practices was the phrase first used, lessons learned was then adopted because of slightly more politics. Yellow pages, expertise locations, who knows what in the organization. Education and training, the reward and the compensation system. What's the classic prescription? And I don't think, given the time constraints, we'll have time to go into much of this. It's in your handout. Most of it is written for a corporate environment. Undertaking intellectual audit, intellectual capital audit, find out what knowledge you have, make knowledge management an explicit part of evaluation and compensation. Examine the corporate culture. Where does it need changing? Incorporate after action. When something happens, you sit back and review what went right, what didn't we do well. Encourage conference meeting, trade show attendance. And when people send them out, to make sure they write something when they come back that can be communicated to the rest of the world. Use storytellers. Assign KM responsibility. The chief knowledge officer should be considered high in the organization. Start with projects that have a big payoff, so demonstrate what you use the KM tool. Build a knowledge map and try to identify where there are gaps. That relates to the intellectual capital audit. Make an intellectual capital audit a routine event. Try to come up with metrics if you can, but that's always difficult. So to get to the meat of the presentation, from what we know about knowledge management, what can we say that's important from a university library point of view? Well, one of them is we need to teach people how to get that information. Of course, every librarian says that, and that's been said here already. Analysis of KM success factors has almost all been done in the corporate world. The academic community hasn't paid much importance to it. This is just a quick little slide of dissertations relating to knowledge management, showing that they peaked for a while and then they went down in the academic world. Whereas in the business world, the knowledge of knowledge, literature of knowledge management just keeps going up every year. A friend and I comes from a dissertation that one of my students did about 15 years ago. And we've kept the time series going. And the knowledge management literature is growing every year. But the interest in the academic world is actually declining a little bit. And this is just a quick list of KM success factors. The phrase alignment is used where linked to industry performance or value, good infrastructure, knowledge structure, knowledge field culture, clear purpose language, change in motivation and practices, multiple channels of knowledge transfer, senior management support. This all comes from this particular article. By the way, I told you that all of this stuff will be available on the conference website. I've only got 5 minutes, so I'll try to get on with it. One important thing is training and user education. That's one area where Jim's talk and mine converge. He put a lot of emphasis on training. I like to show this article. KPMG, major consulting group, did this study of KM failures. And these are the reasons they gave for KM failures. And they looked, they were examining some of the 900 different KM projects, and so there were quite a few failures. So this data is based on a large, very good-sized universe. What's interesting is if you really analyze it, inadequate training in user education is more than half of the reasons for failure. But if you go back and you look at these other things, lack of user uptake through insufficient communication, lack of time to learn the system and the system is too complicated, lack of training. If you combine those things, the KPMG didn't combine into this one. Inadequate training in user education, the finding is very dramatic. It's striking that KPMG and a bunch of really bright people at KPMG never came up with this slide. They never put those things together and came to this conclusion. Okay, what are some of the other things besides training and education? Well, these I think are some of them. And these I think are the lessons to take away for the university background. Working with faculty to build repositories and to make their work visible. Working, building repositories. There's an interesting parallel with the point that Cecilia made when she was talking about a mission statement for libraries. One of the things that I thought was very interesting, and is very much KM in its implication, was that the mission of the library wasn't just to put people in touch with information or with information professionals, but to put the users, the clients, in touch with the faculty who had information. That part of what university libraries should be doing is making their faculty members and the faculty members' expertise more visible, not just within their community, but to the world outside. What else? Liaison with faculty, and research departments. Assigning library professionals to departments and department teams. Embedding library staff with project teams. Federico Sanchez made the point that embedding doesn't translate very well into Spanish. It sounds sort of awkward when you talk about embedding library staff with project teams in Spanish. But it does make a big difference. Trying to get people working with people in the university who maybe can come up with new ideas, or who possibly maybe spinning off a company in the near future. What else? Educating and alerting faculty about software. And then a couple of points that I wish I had. This one of the. If you go last, you have late in the conference. There are two. Either it's a problem because somebody's already said what you were going to say, or you have a great opportunity because you can listen to what's been said and come up with more interesting ideas. These are thinking about clusters and identifying possible research clusters. Organizational corporate clusters around what companies near you, different clusters, individual companies, have research needs that are near your university, and then you can build ties with. Those can be very important. If there's a UNAM spin-off that is bought by Microsoft, a couple of people with that UNAM spin-off are going to be very wealthy. They're obvious candidates to be donors to the library or to the university. It's in the university's advantage, very much an advantage, to identify who those are, to try to keep in touch with alumni. And that was also mentioned in some of the presentations yesterday. The problems of keeping in touch with alumni, because you may have databases of literally plus faculty and students, but if you can negotiate to serve your alumni better, that's an important point for university libraries. We've already talked a lot about patents, but make sure you have people on your library staff who are familiar with patent searching and patent building, because that can be very important to some of the people wait till you do. Sorry. And then I'll just end with a word that Senator Mojave used, frequently try to be proactive rather than reactive. But I guess the bottom line is, I think that this transition from librarianship to knowledge management has the potential to very much be in the interest of university libraries, but to try to be proactive and take advantage. Thank you.